The wind howled over the Carpathian peaks, carrying with it the stench of smoke, decay, and fear. Wallachia trembled beneath the boots of foreign armies and the corruption of its own nobles. The land, once lush and proud, now lay divided, one half under the shadow of the Ottoman crescent, the other rotting from within under Christian greed. From this chaos rode Vlad III Dracula, returning from years of exile with fire in his eyes and vengeance in his heart. The people lined the muddy streets of Târgoviște, whispering prayers as his black horse stamped through the puddles. His armor gleamed dull red in the fading sun, not polished metal, but burnished by the blood of men who had stood in his way. They called him the son of the dragon. To some, he was salvation reborn. To others, the devil returned. Inside the crumbling citadel, Ilona waited. Her fingers, stained with herbs and oils, trembled as she ground a poultice for a dying child. Her healing had once been a quiet act of faith. Now it was an act of rebellion. The church had condemned her craft, whispering of witchery, yet the desperate still came. When she heard the distant thunder of hooves, she knew her beloved had come home. When Vlad entered, the torches flickered as though in awe or fear. His presence filled the chamber, magnetic and terrible. Ilona rushed to him, her heart pounding, but stopped short. The man before her was changed, leaner, harder, his gaze sharp enough to pierce the soul. "Wallachia lives," he said quietly, his voice low as a funeral bell. "But she bleeds, and I will make her enemies drown in her blood." Ilona touched his hand. It was cold, like stone. "My prince, you speak as though mercy were a sin." "Mercy," Vlad murmured, "is the luxury of the unbroken." That night, as fires burned across the city to purge the plague, rumors began to spread. They said Vlad walked the streets in secret, cloaked and masked, visiting the homes of those accused of treason. They said no one who saw him after dusk was ever seen again. By dawn, his loyal soldiers found 3 men impaled outside the walls, their faces twisted in terror, their eyes frozen open as though seeing something unspeakable. Yet Vlad spoke nothing of it. To his council, he was calm and calculating. To his people, righteous and unyielding. But to Ilona, he had become something else entirely, a man divided between savior and monster. That evening, Ilona found him alone in the chapel, kneeling before an iron crucifix. His prayer was not to God, but to something older, whispered in a tongue she did not know. The shadows around him seemed to breathe. "You fear me," he said without turning. "I fear what you are becoming." "Then you are wiser than most," he replied. Later, as the moon rose full over the valley, a messenger galloped into the courtyard, shouting of villagers missing from the nearby hamlet of Poianari. Vlad ordered silence and sent no one to search. "The unfaithful," he said simply, "have already been judged." Days later, the villagers reappeared. Their eyes were hollow, their skin pale as snow. And when they drank from the well, the water turned red. The bells of Târgoviște rang not for prayer, but for warning. The plague of madness had reached the heart of Wallachia. In the streets, people whispered of the cursed ones, villagers who had vanished and returned pale, trembling, and hungry for blood. Ilona, the healer once praised for her gentle hands, now moved through the night like a fugitive. The church had ordered her silence, branding her cures as blasphemy. Yet the dying still sought her out. They left offerings of herbs and bread at her door, begging her to save their kin. By torchlight, she studied a man bound to a cot in her cellar. His veins pulsed black beneath the skin, his lips cracked with thirst. Every few moments he whispered a name, low and broken. "Vlad, Vlad, forgive me." Ilona's heart pounded. She pressed a damp cloth to his mouth, but he snapped at her wrist with animal hunger. His teeth grazed her skin, leaving a smear of blood. In the flickering light, she saw something glint in his eyes, a crimson shimmer that was not his own. That night, a monk in tattered robes came to her door. He was trembling, his breath sour with fear. "You must stop your prince," he whispered. "He performs the rites again. Purifications, he calls them, but they are old, older than Christ." Ilona's eyes widened. "You lie. He seeks only to protect the people." "Then why," the monk asked, "does he need their blood to do it?" He fled before she could question more, vanishing into the mist. The next morning, Ilona climbed the worn stairs of the citadel. The corridors were quiet, too quiet. Guards turned their eyes away as she passed, as though afraid to look upon her. At the end of the hall stood Vlad's chambers, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was heavy with incense and something else, something metallic and sweet. Vlad stood by the window, his armor removed, his bare hands red to the wrist. On the table before him sat a golden chalice. "You should not be here," he said without turning. "People are dying, Vlad. They cry your name in delirium." "Then they die with loyalty on their lips," he replied coldly. She stepped closer, her eyes on the chalice. "What is this?" "A symbol of strength," he said, his tone shifting, "of devotion." "It's blood." The silence between them was thunderous. Vlad turned at last, his gaze aflame with something not entirely human. "Do not mistake what I do for cruelty. This land demands sacrifice. Even God turned his face away." Ilona backed away slowly, her breath shaking. She left the chamber before he could stop her. Only when she reached the courtyard did she dare to look down at her hands, her fingertips stained with the same red that lingered in the air. That night, she could not sleep. The monk's warning echoed through her skull. In her dreams, she saw Vlad kneeling before a black altar, the chalice raised high, blood spilling over his fingers like wine. And somewhere in the distance, bells tolled again, not of warning, but of mourning. Winter came early that year. The snows fell thick over Wallachia, as though the heavens sought to bury its sins. From the ramparts of Poyanari Castle, Vlad watched the frozen river glint like a blade below. His banners hung limp in the still air, crimson dragons against a dying sky. The Ottomans' drums echoed from the south. Their armies had camped across the border, demanding tribute, gold, land, and boys. Vlad's council begged for diplomacy, but he heard only the laughter of his father's killers in their cowardice. He remembered the chains that had once bound him as a hostage, the whips, the taste of iron and ash. He had sworn he would never kneel again. That night, by the flicker of a single candle, he summoned Ilona. The years apart had built a silence between them, too wide to cross easily. Yet she came, her cloak dusted with snow, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "You called for me," she said softly. "You are the only one who does not lie to me," Vlad answered. He poured wine into 2 cups, his hands trembling not from weakness, but from rage barely contained. "They ask me to pay tribute to the empire that murdered my father. They think I will bow, but I will not. I will drown them in fear first." Ilona hesitated before drinking. "You are not your father." "No," Vlad said, his voice a whisper of steel. "But I bear his curse." The words chilled her. He reached for her hand. "Tell me, Ilona, have you ever wondered why blood feeds the living so well? Why it heals the sick? There is power in it, power that cannot be taught by priests or kings." She pulled back, eyes wide. "That is not healing. It is desecration." "It is survival," he hissed. "Do you think faith alone will save us from the Sultan's blade?" He slammed his goblet to the ground, the wine blooming across the stone like spilled blood. Outside, thunder rolled as a messenger rode through the gates, mud-splattered, breathless, terrified. The Ottomans had sent envoys to demand compliance. Ilona followed Vlad to the great hall, her pulse quickening as he stood before the trembling diplomats. "Tell your master," Vlad said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "that Wallachia will send no gold and no sons. We will send only corpses." Hours later, the envoy's screams pierced the night. Ilona watched from her window as flames licked the sky. At dawn, their bodies hung on stakes at the city's edge, impaled in perfect symmetry like ghastly ornaments of defiance. The people called it justice. The church called it blasphemy. Ilona called it madness. Vlad stood at the balcony unmoved, his face pale against the blood-red dawn. When she approached him, he spoke without turning. "Do you despise me, Ilona? I fear for you. Then we are both lost." That night, unable to sleep, Ilona returned to the chapel beneath the castle. Searching through the relics, she found an ancient text bound in blackened leather, a family chronicle sealed with the sigil of the dragon. Its pages spoke of rituals of ascension, of blood spilled to grant divine right, of a pact made by Vlad's father with a spirit that promised dominion in exchange for sacrifice. Her hands trembled as she read. The firstborn shall reign in blood, the last shall become the blood itself. A cold realization pierced her heart. The whispers, the rites, the chalice, it all led back to one truth. Vlad was not the first to drink from that cup. He was the final offering of his cursed line. And above her, in the great hall, the prince who once vowed to save his land fell to his knees before the very darkness that had doomed it. The world burned crimson beneath a moon as pale as bone. The year's first thaw had come to Wallachia, melting snow into rivers of mud and blood. The Ottoman banners lay scattered on the fields beyond Targoviste, their armies crushed beneath Vlad's merciless hand. The victory should have brought celebration, but instead, it brought silence. A silence heavy as grave soil. On the plain outside the city, a forest had grown overnight, not of trees, but of men. Ottoman soldiers, thieves, deserters, and nobles who had defied him, each impaled on sharpened stakes that reached toward the heavens like 1,000 blasphemous prayers. The wind moaned through their mouths, a haunting chorus of agony. Even the birds refused to fly over it. From the castle balcony, Ilona stared into the horizon, her face pale against the red glow of the pyres. Behind her, the corridors hummed with drunken laughter and victory songs. Yet beneath the music lay something deeper, a rhythm of chanting from the catacombs below. The Brotherhood of the Dragon had returned. That evening, Vlad sat upon his throne, his armor dark with dried blood. His captains toasted him as the deliverer of Wallachia, but his eyes were elsewhere, fixed upon something unseen. When Ilona entered the hall, the revelry died, as if a spell had been broken. She moved toward him, trembling with rage. "You call this victory?" she demanded. "This is not justice, it is slaughter." "It is fear," Vlad replied calmly, "and fear is the only language the world understands." Ilona's gaze swept over the faces of his men, hollow-eyed, fevered, drunk not on wine but on his madness. She whispered, "They fear you too, my prince." He smiled faintly. "Then they will obey." When the hall emptied, Vlad descended alone into the crypts beneath the castle, torchlight flickering against the ancient stone. The air grew colder, heavy with incense and decay. He followed the chanting deeper, down winding steps slick with moisture, until he reached a great underground chamber. There, cloaked figures stood in a circle, the Brotherhood of the Dragon, their faces hidden, their voices low and measured. Upon a stone altar lay the banner of his lineage, the sigil of the dragon, stained with centuries of blood. "You called for us, my prince," one intoned. "You promised my father eternal dominion," Vlad said. "Now grant it to me." The leader of the Brotherhood stepped forward, his cowl falling back to reveal a face Ilona once knew. Mihai, her brother. Ilona, who had followed in secret, gasped, her hand clamped over her mouth to muffle the sound. Her brother's eyes met Vlad's, burning with both reverence and dread. "To reign forever," Mihai said, "you must feed the earth with life until it no longer hungers. 1,000 souls, 1,000 stakes." Vlad's voice trembled, not with fear but anticipation. "Then, the forest is ready?" He removed his gauntlet, slicing his palm with a blade and letting the blood fall upon the altar. The Brotherhood bowed, murmuring in a tongue older than Latin, older than sin itself. The ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet. Ilona stumbled backward, her vision spinning. Her brother's voice rose above the chant, "For the blood of the dragon sustains the realm, and the dragon shall not die." When she fled the crypt, the air outside tasted of iron. The torches across the city guttered at once, plunging the streets into darkness, and far on the battlefield, where the impaled corpses stood, something impossible happened. Their mouths opened. A whisper, faint but growing, rolled through the forest of the dead. It was not a scream, not quite a moan, but something between, a sound like breath returning to a body long denied it. By dawn, the sun rose over the forest of 1,000 stakes, and the Prince of Wallachia stood upon the walls, his cloak billowing in the wind. His men knelt below, trembling before him. To his people, he was invincible. To his enemies, he was death incarnate. But to the woman who loved him, he had become something far worse. A man who had learned to love the darkness more than the light. The plague crept through Poyanari Castle like a silent serpent. The soldiers coughed blood into their helmets, and the servants whispered prayers to a god who no longer seemed to listen. The fires that once blazed in the great hall now guttered, their smoke curling into the high rafters like mourning veils. And yet, in the midst of it all, Prince Vlad remained untouched, his skin pale, his eyes brighter than ever, his strength undiminished. They called him the immortal prince. But Ilona knew immortality always demanded a price. She stood before him in the throne room, her gown dark with soot and her hair unbound. The distance between them felt like centuries. "Your people die, Vlad," she whispered. "Their children rot in the streets while you play God." Vlad rose from the throne, his cloak dragging behind him like a shadow that refused to let go. "I am no god," he said, "but I am all that stands between them and oblivion." "You've become the oblivion," Ilona snapped. "You speak of salvation, but all I see is death." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a fevered whisper. "Death is not the end, Ilona. It is only a door, and I have learned how to open it." Her heart stilled. "You mean the right?" He looked at her then, not as a lover, but as a believer looks upon a relic. "Join me. Together we can rule forever. No more war, no more loss." Tears welled in her eyes. "I do not want eternity, Vlad. I want the man who once swore he would die to protect the living." His expression hardened, the fragile humanity in him turning to glass. "Then you are already dead to me." By his command, the guards seized her. She did not fight, only stared at him as if memorizing his face for the last time. They dragged her to the dungeon, the air thick with rot and whispers. Chains bit into her wrists, rats scurried along the floor, feeding on the corpses of the plague victims. For days she endured darkness and silence. Only the sound of footsteps reminded her that the world above still moved. But one night, the torchlight flickered outside her cell, and a hooded figure appeared. "Ilona," a familiar voice murmured. Her heart caught in her throat. Mihai, her brother, alive. "You?" she gasped. "The Brotherhood has you enslaved." "No," he said bitterly. "I serve them." He unlocked the cell and led her through a narrow passage that wound deep beneath the castle. The air grew colder, humming with energy like a held breath. "You think the monks serve Vlad," he said, his tone trembling. "But you are wrong. He is their vessel, their sacrifice. They need him to complete the pact our father began generations ago." "You helped them?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "I believed they sought to end death itself," Mihai said, eyes shining with shame. "But all they want is to bind it, to feed upon it." Ilona froze. "Then he will die." "No," Mihai whispered. "He will never die. That is the curse." They reached a hidden staircase leading to the catacombs. Above them, faint chanting echoed, the Brotherhood's voices rising in unholy unison. The ground quivered as if the castle itself were breathing. Ilona clutched her brother's arm. "Then we must stop them." "It's too late," Mihai said, lowering his hood. "He has already begun." He turned toward her, tears streaking his face. "Forgive me, sister." Before she could speak, guards appeared at the end of the corridor. Mihai shoved her into the shadows and faced them alone. Ilona watched in horror as they cut him down, his body falling silently to the floor, his blood pooling like ink. When the soldiers left, she knelt beside him, her hands trembling. His final words slipped from his lips like a prayer. "The right must be stopped, or he will consume us all." Ilona pressed her forehead to his, sobbing in the dark. Then, with the last of her strength, she rose. She would face Vlad, not as his lover, but as his judge. Above, thunder split the heavens. Vlad stood at the tower window, staring into the storm, unaware that the woman he once loved was coming for him, with nothing left in her heart but fire. The night split open with thunder. Storm clouds churned above Poyanari Castle, black and swollen, the air thick with the metallic scent of rain, and something darker, older. Beneath the roar of the storm, Prince Vlad Dracula knelt before an altar carved from obsidian and bone. The throne room was gone. In its place stood a sanctum of ruin, pillars etched with sigils that pulsed like living veins, braziers burning with crimson flame. Around him, the Brotherhood of the Dragon chanted in a forgotten tongue, their hoods glistening with blood. In his hands, Vlad held the dragon chalice, the same vessel Ilona had once found, only now it overflowed, not with wine or water, but with the lifeblood of his own soldiers. Their corpses lay strewn across the hall, their pale faces frozen in silent devotion. "For Wallachia," Vlad whispered, his voice trembling between prayer and madness, "for the realm that death shall never claim." Ilona reached the castle gates as lightning shattered the sky. Her brother's blood still clung to her skin. The guards were gone, or what was left of them. The courtyard was littered with half-burned bodies, some twitching, others whispering Vlad's name as they died. Inside, the walls bled. She followed the chanting to the throne room and saw him, her prince, her ruin, kneeling amid a storm of fire and shadow. "Vlad!" she cried, her voice breaking. He turned slowly, and for a moment the man she loved was there, the boy who once swore to protect his people, to die before bowing to tyranny. But then his eyes caught the light, glowing red as fresh blood. "You came," he said softly, "even after betraying me." "You betrayed yourself," she replied, "and everything you once fought for." He stood, spreading his arms as the monks' chanting reached a fever pitch. The flames rose higher, licking the ceiling. "Do you not see, Ilona? Death is the true enemy. I have conquered it. I have broken its chains." She stepped closer, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "No, Vlad, you've become its vessel." Her words struck him like an arrow. For a heartbeat, his resolve faltered. Then the ground trembled. The altar pulsed, alive, feeding on the blood that drenched its stones. The brothers of the dragon fell to their knees, bowing before him. One by one, they slit their palms, letting their blood join the river that flowed to Vlad's feet. The hall blazed with unholy light. Vlad raised the chalice high. "Let it be done!" He drank. The fire consumed everything. Windows shattered. The banners of Wallachia turned to ash. Screams echoed through the corridors as light poured from Vlad's body, red, gold, and black intertwining in impossible patterns. His armor melted into his skin. His veins darkened. His heart thundered like a war drum. Ilona was thrown back by the force, her body slamming against the wall. She watched in horror as the altar cracked open, revealing a pit beneath it, a chasm pulsing with shadows, as if the earth itself had grown a heartbeat. Vlad rose from the flames, unburned. The storm had stopped. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. He looked upon his trembling hands. The wounds that once marred them had vanished. The blood he spilled had turned black, shimmering with unnatural light. "I have done it," he whispered, voice trembling with awe. "I have slain death." Ilona crawled toward him, shaking her head. "No, Vlad, you have become it." Her words echoed through the hall. And for the first time, the new immortal prince felt a chill, like the breath of something ancient whispering through his veins. He looked to the altar, and in the dark reflection of the chalice, he saw not a man, but a creature with red eyes and teeth sharp as daggers, smiling back at him. He dropped the cup, but it was too late. The blood had chosen. Outside, the storm ceased. The dawn broke red over Wallachia. The Brotherhood knelt amid the ruin, murmuring prayers of triumph and terror. And Ilona, crawling through the wreckage, looked back one last time at the man who had once loved her. He stood in the center of the devastation, aglow with infernal majesty, half human, half myth. And as his shadow stretched across the burning stones, she whispered through her tears, "May God forgive us both." The skies over Wallachia never brightened again. For 40 nights, crimson storms wept over the forests, and thunder rolled like drums of judgment. The rivers turned dark, and wolves prowled through abandoned villages where no children sang, no bells rang. In the heart of this silence stood Poyanari Castle, once a fortress of pride, now a mausoleum. Its towers leaned like weary sentinels, the banners of the dragon, blackened by fire, hung in tatters, and within its halls, Prince Vlad walked alone. The fire had spared him, but not his mind. He spoke to the walls, to shadows, to ghosts that answered only in whispers. Mirrors were covered, yet he claimed to see Ilona in every reflection, the way she had looked before the ritual, her eyes pleading, her hands trembling as if reaching for his. "You said death could not take you," her voice echoed in his dreams, but what if death never left? He awoke each night drenched in sweat, blood pooling beneath his nails where he had clawed the floor. He no longer ate. He no longer prayed. His men feared to enter his chamber, for the smell of iron and decay lingered in the air like incense to a god of rot. Outside the castle, the Brotherhood of the Dragon had begun their quiet rebellion. They gathered in the catacombs, whispering the truth they could no longer deny. The prince had become the curse. They had sought power eternal, but now their fields withered, their veins burned, and the very air around Poyanari stank of grave earth. So they turned against him. One by one, they entered the great hall, heads bowed, chanting prayers not of devotion, but of binding. Their torches flickered as they raised their sacred sigils and spoke the old words meant to cage demons in flesh. Vlad emerged from the shadows, barefoot, his once golden armor tarnished black. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You would imprison your king?" A monk stepped forward, trembling. "You are no king. You are the wound that will not heal." Vlad smiled, a small, sad smile. "Then I shall be your eternity." The massacre was silent. No blade, no scream, only the sound of breath being stolen. When the doors opened again, the monks lay strewn like discarded robes, their blood dripping down the stairs into the chapel below. And there, among them, Ilona's brother Mihai, his body preserved by something crueler than mercy. His eyes stared upward, unseeing, as if forever pleading for forgiveness. Vlad knelt beside him. "I told you, little brother," he whispered, "no one escapes the dragon's blood. Days blurred into years, or perhaps years into a single endless night. The world beyond the mountains forgot Wallachia's prince, and those who ventured near the castle swore they heard singing from its highest tower, a woman's lullaby carried on the wind. At last, even Vlad's enemies ceased their prayers against him. The Turks, the Hungarians, the Boyars, all believed him long dead. But beneath the castle, deep in the crypt of the dragon, the Brotherhood returned, their faces hidden behind masks of bone. This time, they came not to worship, but to seal. They found him in the throne room, sitting in silence, Ilona's wedding ring clutched between his fingers. When they approached, he didn't fight. He only lifted his gaze to them, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "Do what you came to do," he said quietly. "The dragon is tired. They bound him in chains of silver, forged in holy oil and the ashes of saints. They led him down into the earth, to the chamber where the first ritual had begun. As they entombed him, the earth shook, as if the land itself mourned. Blood seeped between the stones, pulsing faintly like the heart of something still alive. And when they laid Ilona's body beside his, at her brother's final command, they prayed that her presence might soothe the monster's eternal hunger. When the last monk left the crypt, he sealed the door with a single phrase carved in Latin above the arch. "Here lies the dragon, bound in love and blood." And so Wallachia fell into ruin. The forests reclaimed the roads, and centuries of silence buried the truth. But far above, in the broken tower of Poyanari, a candle still flickered each night. And on certain nights, when the wind rose just right, the villagers swore they heard a voice whispering her name, over and over, like a prayer that even death could not silence. Ilona, London, 1897. A city of fog, of gaslight and whispers. The century nears its end, and yet the streets still reek of coal smoke and unseen sins. In a modest study at 27 Cheney Walk, a scholar bends over a desk littered with ink-stained pages, wax seals, and foreign dust. His name is Abraham Stoker, a playwright, a critic, a dreamer, and, increasingly, a man haunted by shadows not his own. It began with a letter from Transylvania. The handwriting was elegant, the paper coarse and yellowed with age. The seal, a dragon encircling a cross, was cracked but intact. There was no return address, only a line scrawled in Latin beneath the wax, Historia sanguinis est historia regum. The history of blood is the history of kings. Inside, he found fragments of parchment, half-burned pages written in a strange mixture of Church Latin and Old Romanian. The ink shimmered faintly, almost red under the lamplight. The message was clear. To the one who writes, I entrust my confession. At first, Stoker dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, perhaps some forgotten relic sent from one of his theatrical admirers. But as he translated the first lines, something shifted in the room. The words seemed to breathe. I am Vlad, called the Dragon's Son, the one whom death denied. My soul is bound to the quill and the parchment, to blood and to story. Write me true, and I shall rise again. Stoker's candle flickered violently. He blinked, heart hammering. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. He read on. Each night that followed, he worked feverishly, translating, annotating, tracing every name, every date. His friends grew concerned. His wife, Florence, whispered that he had begun to talk in his sleep, muttering words in a tongue she did not recognize. And though his ink bottle never seemed to run dry, he did not recall refilling it. One evening, while working late, Stoker cut his finger on the sharp edge of a letter knife. A drop of blood fell onto the parchment. The letters beneath it darkened, then moved, crawling across the page to form new words. He stared in horror. The writing was no longer his translation. It was an address. Sigashora, Monastery of the Dragon, Vault 12. He tried to wash the blood away, but the stain remained. That night, he dreamed of a mountain fortress buried in mist, its doors chained in silver, its walls whispering with trapped voices. When he woke, his sheets were soaked with sweat, his hands trembled, his nails blackened with dried ink, or something like it. Weeks later, a crate arrived at his home, unmarked except for a wax sigil identical to the one on the letter. Inside was a bundle of older manuscripts, preserved with herbs and lined in lead, and beneath them, wrapped in a strip of blackened cloth, a human quill, a feather carved from bone, hollow and sharp as a needle. The accompanying note read, Continue the confession, the dragon sleeps, but words are the breath of the dead. Florence begged him to burn it all. But Stoker could not. Each page he read seemed to unlock another memory, not of his own life, but of another's. The crack of thunder over Wallachia, the smell of burning tallow, a woman's voice whispering a name he did not know yet could not forget. Ilona. He began to dream of her nightly, her pale hands reaching from darkness, her lips forming the same warning again and again. Do not write him, Abraham. Every word feeds him. And still he wrote. His manuscripts multiplied, his skin grew cold, his reflection thinned. One winter night, Florence found him slumped over his desk, eyes wide open, ink covering his wrists like veins. The lamp still burned, though the oil had long run out. The parchment before him glowed faintly, and the final lines he had translated were fresh, still glistening red. Ink is the blood of memory, and mine shall never dry. She reached for the page, but the moment her fingers brushed it, the writing dissolved, seeping into the fibers like smoke. When she turned her husband over, his pulse was weak but steady, yet something was gone from his eyes. They no longer looked through her, they looked past her, as if searching for someone else. In the weeks that followed, the letters kept coming. More parchments, more names, more accounts of a prince who drank life to defy death. Each envelope was unpostmarked, each was sealed in the same way. Each contained ink that never dried. And though Florence tried to destroy them, each morning she awoke to find them back on his desk, perfectly folded, perfectly whole. Twist. One night, while cleaning his study, Florence noticed something strange beneath the lamplight. The edges of the oldest letters, those he claimed were centuries old, were damp. She touched one. The liquid smeared across her fingertips. It was not ink, it was blood. The year was 1897, though in Stoker's study, time had lost its order. Daylight became a rumor. Night was his constant companion. The London fog pressed against the windows like a suffocating hand, and the scratching of his quill no longer sounded like writing. It was feeding. Florence no longer entered his room. She said the air within it was wrong, that the shadows moved even when the lamps were still. But she could hear him, always writing, always whispering. Sometimes he whispered her name, sometimes another. Ilona. The letters from Transylvania had ceased, but the voice in his dreams had not. Now it spoke clearly, deeply, as if from beneath the earth. "You've read my words. You've tasted my blood. Now write my truth." Stoker's journals became darker, the margins crowded with sketches of castles, impaled figures, and eyes that burned like coals. He no longer signed his name. The initials changed. VD. He began sleeping during the day, claiming the sunlight spoiled the ink. Florence found him once kneeling before the fire, holding the bone quill over the flames as if consecrating it. "It must be fed," he murmured. "The quill remembers." When she demanded to know what he meant, he only smiled, softly, almost kindly. "I am only its hand. The words are older than me." That spring, Stoker vanished from London. His publisher assumed illness. His friends believed exhaustion. But Florence discovered a single ticket tucked into his notebook, to Transylvania. His diary, left behind, recorded his final lucid entry. The letters spoke of a monastery near Sigashora. The monks guard a tomb sealed in silver and silence. If I can see it, touch it, I may finally understand the truth of the dragon. Weeks later, in the mountains of Romania, the villagers whispered of an Englishman who arrived pale and trembling, muttering about history and curses. They said he paid guides in gold to lead him to the monastery of the dragon, a place none dared enter after sunset. The monastery was half buried in snow. The bells had long since rusted. Inside, Stoker found the monks, old, blind, their lips sealed with red wax. They moved soundlessly through the corridors, their heads bowed, their hands clasped in prayer that never ended. When he showed them the parchment, they recoiled as if burned. One monk, his mouth trembling beneath the wax, scratched a single word into the dust: "Return." But Stoker did not leave. That night, the storm rose, and the chanting of the monks became frantic. Through the howling wind, he heard another sound, soft, rhythmic, familiar, the scratch of a quill. He followed it through torchlit halls, down to a door sealed with silver chains. The metal was engraved with a Latin warning: "Here lies the dragon, bound in love and blood." The moment his hand touched the lock, the air turned cold enough to crack stone, his candle extinguished, and in the darkness, a voice, low, intimate, and terrible, spoke within his mind. "You've come to finish my story." The chains broke with a sound like bone snapping. Inside the chamber lay two figures, one in armor blackened by age, the other in a tattered gown, her face serene in death. Between them rested a single book bound in skin, its pages blank. Stoker trembled. His hand moved of its own accord, drawing the quill from his coat. He dipped it into the dried blood pooled at Vlad's feet. The page bled. "You are not the author," the voice whispered. "You are the echo." His body convulsed. His mouth opened, but another voice spoke through it, low, accented, ancient. "At last," it said, "the ink has found its vessel." The monks broke their silence then, chanting in terror. Some fled, others threw themselves to the ground. The tomb shook, the walls splitting. Blood seeped from the cracks in the floor, spiraling toward the coffin like veins seeking a heart. Stoker's body rose into the air, the book floating before him. His eyes turned black, his veins glowed faintly red. "Write," the voice commanded. And he did. His words poured across the pages, not in English but in the tongue of the dead, a confession centuries old, a curse reborn in ink. When dawn came, the monastery was silent again. The monks were gone. The tomb lay open, the chains melted to ash. Only one thing remained, a manuscript on the altar, signed in a shaking hand. By Abraham Stoker, servant of the dragon. Twist. Months later, the manuscript arrived in London by mail, without a return address. Florence opened it, recognizing her husband's handwriting, yet something was wrong. His signature was mirrored, written backward. When she turned the final page, a single line, written in a darker ink, appeared beneath his name. "He writes through me still." London, 1897. Rain lashes the cobblestones like whip strikes, and thunder shudders through the bones of the city. In a small study on Exeter Street, Abraham Stoker sits before his desk, ashen, fevered, yet calm, as if the storm itself obeyed his pulse. The manuscript lies open. 1,000 pages of nightmare, tales of castles, brides, wolves, and a prince who could not die. But tonight, only one page remains unwritten. Florence stands in the doorway, pale from sleepless nights. "Abraham," she whispers, "you haven't eaten, you haven't spoken. What are you writing?" He looks up, eyes hollow, and smiles faintly. "The ending," he says, "but it's not mine." The candles flicker. The ink pot trembles, its surface rippling though there is no wind. From beneath the desk, a drop of dark liquid seeps between the floorboards, thick as blood. Outside, the thunder changes tone. It begins to echo like a chant, not English, not human. Florence steps closer. The air smells of iron and roses. When she touches his shoulder, his flesh is cold and her fingers come away red, not from blood, but ink. "It's not over," he murmurs. "It was never fiction." Across the sea, beneath the Carpathian moon, the ruins of the Monastery of the Dragon groan. The tomb, long sealed in silver, quivers as if breathing. The quill in Stoker's hand begins to scratch of its own will, faster, harsher, each stroke mirrored in the dust of that ancient crypt. Lightning splits the sky. A single droplet of ink falls from Stoker's pen, sinking into the parchment. Another falls across the seas, onto bone. Then, silence. A heartbeat, and from within the crypt, a voice exhales. "The author has named me." Back in London, Florence watches in horror as her husband's eyes darken to crimson. The pages turn themselves, the script shifting from English to Latin, then to something older, each letter shaped like a wound. The room trembles, shelves collapse, windows shatter inward, the storm bursting through as if drawn to him. Stoker rises, the quill still moving, writing words she cannot see. "Abraham, stop!" she cries, trying to tear the pages away. But the ink stains her. Skin, burning cold, seeping beneath her veins. In that moment, she sees him, the dragon, not as legend, but as presence. Vlad Dracula, pale and regal, standing behind her husband's chair, his armor gleaming like obsidian. He places a hand upon Stoker's shoulder. "You have written me true," he says softly. "And truth demands life." Florence screams as the two shadows merge. Stoker's body convulses, the inkpot shatters, and blood sprays across the manuscript, forming a seal over the final words. When the storm finally breaks, the room is still. Only the sound of a quill remains, faint but steady. Florence steps forward, trembling. Her husband is gone. The chair is empty. On the desk lies the finished manuscript, Dracula. The last line reads, "He is returned, for I have written his name." Epilogue. Months later, Dracula is published. Critics call it vivid, too vivid, as if the author had seen it all firsthand. But Florence cannot read it. She keeps it locked away, for when she looks at the first edition, she swears the ink is still wet. One night, unable to resist, she opens it once more. There, beneath the printed text, she sees faint handwriting, not her husband's, not human, writing itself line by line. The quill still moves. In a faraway land under the Carpathian soil, a coffin creaks open, the centuries groan, and the dragon rises to greet the dawn that will never burn him. Final twist. In the archives of a forgotten London publisher, a single surviving proof copy of Dracula remains. On its final page, scrawled in red ink, is an unrecorded line that no one remembers writing. "I am eternal, for he has written my soul.